first drew you to the topic of epileptic women in 19th century asylums for your MSc?
There's a history of epilepsy in my family, so I was very much interested in determining what treatments were available to those people who had the condition in the 19th century. Many people diagnosed with epilepsy today can lead completely normal lives thanks to a greater understanding of the condition and good medication. But this wasn't the case in the 19th century. Epilepsy was misunderstood, and some people thought it was even caused by the devil or witchcraft. There was no medication to stop seizures, and sufferers could be incarcerated for long periods of time, often for many years, and could ultimately die in asylums. Many were unable to work because of the condition, and others were dismissed from their jobs because employers witnessing someone having a seizure would be distressed by it, and also there was a social stigma attached to it as well. So if an individual with epilepsy didn't have a supportive family network, an asylum was really the only place that they could find refuge for what in effect was an incurable disorder.
That's interesting. So how did these discoveries encourage you to look into the subject of psychiatric treatment in the past?
Well, I became fascinated with the way people and mental health disorders or hidden disabilities were perceived by society. I wanted to know how they were treated within their family setting, but also wanted to explore the social, cultural and medical context of epilepsy and discover what became of them. In effect, many people disappeared from their families for decades due to mental health disorders. They were locked up in asylums and became institutionalised by a system which was actually designed to care and cure them. Or some family members simply put their mentally disabled relatives in an asylum because of the social stigma attached to having a relative with a mental health problem. And this research led to 2 books, the first of which was published last year, Lunatics, Imbeciles and Idiots, and the latest, Murder, Madness and Mayhem, concentrates on criminal insanity in the Victorian and Edwardian period.
So possibly many people also disappeared from conventional records as a result of their admission.
Yes.
What were the typical conditions of those locked up in these institutions in the 19th century?
Yes, that's right. Yes, many genealogy brick walls, I think, could be explained by the fact that ancestors were admitted into an asylum, and some census records only record the initials of patients who are in an asylum. They don't actually give their full names. The conditions in asylum in the 19th century changed as the century progressed. At the beginning of the century, it was very poor. Individuals were literally manacled and chained, kept in cells and rarely saw the light of day. But then a group of forward-thinking politicians and doctors did an investigation and had a look at the provision for the mentally ill, and they looked at asylums, and what they discovered so appalled them that new laws were instigated. And by the 1840s, virtually every county in England had its own asylum, and some of the larger counties, in fact, had 2 or 3. Now, these new asylums were built for the benefit, care and cure of the patients, so they had a very clear purpose. Their location was important. They were always away from towns in areas of pleasant countryside, but with good railway links for the ease of transferring patients. They resembled stately homes, in effect, which is why so many of them could still be seen today. They were very much self-contained estates with their own farms and ornamental gardens. They had landscape gardeners who would actually help design the gardens, and sport was important. So there were things like cricket pitches and croquet lawns, and patients were encouraged to play in teams with the medical superintendents. There were airing courts where patients could go outside and get fresh air. Indoors, patients were required to sleep in dormitories, sometimes up to 50 patients at a time if they were considered to be of low risk to themselves or to others. But patients who were more noisy or difficult would be given smaller rooms, and there were single rooms available for patients who were either suicidal or for epileptic patients who needed to be checked on more regularly. Peepholes would be available, were put in the door so that the attendants could check on them in the night to make sure that they were okay. The ironmongery and the chains and manacles that had been implemented at the beginning of the century were done away with, but there were secluded and padded rooms for patients who were very violent. But by the 1890s, they couldn't just be put in there without it being recorded. There had to be a reason, and a mechanical restraint register was implemented, and had to be signed by a medical officer if a patient needed restraint.
Presumably many of the stories you uncovered were both moving and shocking. Tell us about one live story or case study that stands out for you.
I think one of the most poignant cases that stands out was when we were researching for our latest book on criminal insanity, and we discovered a case of a 32-year-old married man and father of 4 who was a farm labourer in Fetteresso parish in Stonehaven in Scotland. He became the target of bullying by his 3 co-workers, who continually mocked and jeered him, but also did things like blocked his chimney so that his house filled with smoke and smeared cow dung all over his farm implements. And Robert Smith tolerated this condition for as long as he possibly could, but then eventually he just flipped. And in 1893, after several nights of unbroken sleep, he took a couple of shotguns and he shot one of the men at point blank range, killing him instantly, and severely wounded one of the others. As a result of that, his life was never the same again. Clearly he was arrested, he was sent to prison, and spent the rest of his life in and out of prisons. He only escaped the noose because it was proved in court that he was insane. And so he was then led to a life of incarceration, becoming more and more demented as his life progressed. One of the saddest points about it was that his wife told the 4 children that their father had died. Their 3 sons she sent off to Quarriers' Homes, which was a charity, and the boys were shipped out to Canada, never to return to Scotland again. And I think it just shows that the actions of others can actually have a very negative impact on our mental well-being, and the effect of others can have a major impact on our lives.
So what would you recommend to someone trying to research an ancestor who in the past has been incarcerated?
Well, the first thing I would suggest you do, if you think you might have an ancestor who has been in asylum, or you have an ancestor that you've lost all trace of, is to pop their names into the lunacy patient admission registers on Ancestry and see if you get a match. And if you do, take a note of which asylum they were in, and then contact the relevant county archive that asylum was in to see if there are any available admission and case notes. Most public asylums, pauper asylums, certainly still have case notes available. And some record offices and archives have actually digitised the case notes. Cheshire Archives, for example, have digitised the case notes for patients who were admitted to Macclesfield. And West Riding have the collection of records for Stanley Royd Asylum in Wakefield, digitised and available to view online for free. Asylum case notes contain a varying amount of information, including full details of family and hereditary illnesses, but also from about the 1890s, they took photographs of the patients, and so they're available for us to look at. They contain patient testimonies as well, and so they allow us to gain a much greater understanding of family situations and how our ancestors felt about being locked away. In essence, they're a really unique resource, and I think if you find that you have an asylum ancestor, you may well have hit a genealogy golf mine.
And finally, what are you looking forward to most at the Secret Lives Conference?
Well, I'm really looking forward to reconnecting with like-minded people, particularly those speakers who have also been researching asylums. I'm going to enjoy the excellent programme of talks that are on offer, and I'm really hoping to build up lots of new knowledge and make some really good new contacts.